A leadership coup, a new premier and a major policy pivot. Can Labor's desperate 11th hour overhaul save the electoral furniture? And does Victoria have a corruption disease that's spread to Canberra? Deputy Liberal leader Jane Hume joins us this morning. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. 1 minute, Labor was showing off its unity at the party's national conference. The next, it was tearing itself apart in Victoria. Australia's most unpopular leader, Jacinta Allans, forced out, the little-known Ben Carroll installed as Premier. His first step, announcing a royal commission into the building sector, plagued by allegations of corruption. The abrupt shift on leadership and policy comes just months out from what was already looming as an extraordinary state election, with voters split three ways between Labor, the Coalition and One Nation. It's a reminder of how abruptly parties can pivot when they want to hold on to power.
I've made the difficult decision to step aside.
Which essentially hands the leadership cleanly to Ben Carroll.
Ben, how are you feeling? Will Ben have your support?
Now, this is an unexpected twist.
It's complete chaos.
It looked like we might actually have an interim premier for a while there.
We've heard yelling. The situation is messy.
I am delighted to announce that we have a new Premier of Victoria.
Breaking news, Ben Carroll has been elected Victorian Premier. How's it coming?
Members will come to order.
I am honoured and humbled to have been elected unanimously.
He lacks the necessary integrity to govern Victoria.
I think someone's a little bit upset over there. Today, we are saying enough is enough. In my government, integrity will not be optional.
He's wasted no time setting a new direction for the state.
My first action as Premier will be to call a royal commission into the construction sector.
Designed to calm voter backlash over the cost of big build corruption allegations.
Might have a new leader, a new face, but this is the same corrupt government.
I am not Daniel Andrews. I am not Jacinta Allans.
The Victorian Labor Party is a criminal cartel and they've just changed the Don.
I'm going to be a Premier that values every single dollar.
He is pragmatic, he is decisive.
And he has been complicit in everything that has been done in this Victorian government.
This is a rotten Labor government in Victoria, just as we've got a rotten federal government.
It's consistent with our zero tolerance at the federal level for corruption.
There are also questions over the future of the suburban rail loop in Melbourne, which the federal government is promising billions for. Would you be glad to see it go?
We'll work constructively with the Victorian government to make sure that the interests of Victorians are looked after.
When the federal government has kicked money into projects like the SRL, they've done so knowingly that the CFMU has operated those sites with organised crime. That's why we need a federal royal commission.
I've called a royal commission. Nothing will shine a light more on the sector than a royal commission.
What Victorians need is a fresh start.
Thank you.
We are joined on the couch this morning by national politics editor for the Herald Sun, James Campbell, columnist and senior writer for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Jacqueline Maley, and ABC federal politics and economics reporter Tom Crowley. Very good morning to all of you. James, let me start with you. Jacinta Allans didn't want to go in the end. No. Why did the party force her out, and will the change help their chances?
The reason they forced her out was because they were going to be annihilated under her leadership. There was a poll recently from Redbridge which showed that not only would the Liberal Party and One Nation get a majority in the lower house, they'd also control the upper house. Their primary vote tanked in February when Watson's report revealed the scale of the corruption on the big build. She was responsible for most of those projects. She was adamant there couldn't be a royal commission. She basically made every poster winner loser in this debacle, and there was no recovering for her.
Jacinta Allans, Jacqueline, did face sexism and misogyny during her time as Premier. There were the famous Ditch the Witch billboards only a couple of months ago. But in the end, was that a factor, or was it her own failures that brought her undone?
I think it was chiefly absolutely her own failures and the failure of her predecessor. I mean, the government had become basically a byword for corruption or for the toleration of corruption, for the grift, the thuggery, the violence that we've seen on those CFMEU-controlled building sites. And as she had become herself a vector, I think, for all of the disgust and indeed the hatred by some voters of the government, and rightly or wrongly, she was copying it. And I do think there was misogyny mixed in there, that it's always latent in the community. And when there's a female politician who is particularly hated, it will come out, and it did, but it didn't explain the entire situation.
And Tom, just to explain to those outside Victoria, this hatred, as Jackie puts it there, of not just Jacinta Allans, but of Dan Andrews as well. What is that about?
I think it's just sort of, Andrews played politics with such a distinctive style that worked for him electorally for a while, but I think was sort of starting to be a bit grating by the time that he left. And I think it was just the accumulation of baggage on the crime and corruption questions, but on debt as well. The state government's paying $1 in every $10 on debt interest costs at the moment. It's in a really significant position. It's high taxing and it's also high spending. It's not easy to see how all of that can be unpicked, and that's why I think there will be cynicism about Ben Carroll getting up there in his first line, and the one line everyone heard being, "I'm not Daniel Andrews, I'm not Jacinta Allans."
He's really defining himself by who he's not.
That's right. But if there's one line that you wanted everyone, even if they're sniggering at you a little bit, and even if they are kind of, think that you are being a bit cynical, the one thing that they're talking about is that you're not Daniel Andrews. And then you've got Steve Bracks appear across every media platform for 24 hours sort of laughing and saying, "Oh, well, he's not Steve Bracks either." I think the message is, I kind of am Steve Bracks, and did you maybe like that version of Labor a little bit better?
Than the other two.
And that's the quickest way to kind of, I suppose, skip. He doesn't seem to have the gift of the gab. It's not that he's going to establish himself as this charismatic, beloved leader in 3 or 4 months, but can you evoke Bracks really quickly and staunch the bleeding? That's what it's all about.
I think there's also a COVID hangover here. A lot of the hatred of Andrews, I think, is a COVID hangover. He got re-elected at the end of COVID. But there's a terrible sourness in the community about the memory of that period, and anyone who's sort of associated with it, I think, is being punished. People in Melbourne will say in conversation, the place hasn't been the same since COVID. We're still getting over it. There's the long tail of the effect on a lot of the kids.
Children, yeah.
Children, everybody has stories about children who have, didn't go back to school
and it's still being felt.
It's still being felt.
Just on the way the change of leader happened, it struck me that once again, Labor's got these rules, right, that were brought in to stop leadership changes happening too often, where the membership of the party is meant to get a vote if there's a ballot. But it's only happened once. That was 13 years ago when Bill Shorten beat Anthony Albanese for the leadership after they lost government. Since then, at the state and federal level, James, every time there's a change of leader, they seem to sort it out in the caucus. The one who's going to get rolled pulls out of the contest, so there's never a membership vote.
Well, the thing to understand about Victorian ALP is that there isn't a membership vote for anything. There hasn't been a pre-selection in Victoria for the better part of 10 years. The factions,
10 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
The factions sit around a table and they decide what they're going to do. And in the case of the right, the factions are entirely comprised of union secretaries. And then those names, what they agree on, is sent up to National Executive and rubber stamped there. The idea that, and you can't even, it's also not really understood, I think, how difficult it is to join the ALP. Like, there are hundreds of memberships applications that never get out of committee because the right and the left can't agree on it. So you've got no one's joined in a very long time. They don't get a vote on their members of Parliament. The idea that those members of Parliament were suddenly going to turn around and let them decide which one of them rules is just ridiculous. It's just not going to happen.
On the Royal Commission, so Ben Carroll, new Premier, big shift, says we're going to have a Royal Commission. We're yet to see the details of the scope and indeed whether Jacinta Allans and Dan Andrews will be called to appear. But he's sending the signals, isn't he, that this is going to cover everything, this is going to be big. Who has most to fear from this, do you think, Jacqueline?
I think with the CFMEU, any sort of wrongdoers in the bikie community, perhaps, all of, the sundry criminals that have been operating out of those work sites, allegedly.
But Labor as well? Will Labor?
Yeah, of course. I think Dan Andrews, Jacinta Allans, I know that Jess Wilson, the opposition leader, has already put out what she says should be a list of witnesses to the Royal Commission, which I think is probably overreach. I don't think you can dictate to a Royal Commissioner who he or she should call as witnesses. But But, I mean, they're the people that should be within... I mean, because if it's systemic, we don't just care about the criminals on the ground. We care about the systems and, indeed, the government that tolerated and, at best, you could say, had extreme incuriosity about what was happening with public money on those sites.
What about the federal government? Will it potentially be embarrassed by what comes out of this?
There are some questions, particularly because in this federal budget there are a few extra billion kicked towards the suburban rail loop. So what sort of conversations were had around the federal cabinet table about where that money was going is important. I think federally they're just sort of watching what's happening in Victoria and the smouldering ruin and quite happy to be as far removed from it as they possibly can. I think everyone keeps talking about this election as the canary in the coal mine experience, and I think they're really just watching to see these outer suburbs, the suburban rail loop belt itself, which is exactly where One Nation might have its most significant electoral effect on Labor. It's these sort of outer suburban seats that Labor's long regarded as safe. They're the seats that Peter Dutton spent a lot of time in 2025 campaigning in. So in Melbourne, we're talking about Gorton and Hawke and Bruce, some of these outer suburban seats. I think that Trades Hall poll that you mentioned, some of those primary votes in some of those seats were enough to have people scared. Not coincidental, by the way, that a lot of the left figures from Jacinta Allans' faction who were among the group to turn on her were in a lot of these seats and were feeling that pinch and that danger themselves. I think that's where the federal Labor will be sitting back and thinking, A, we wouldn't mind if the Vic Party gets a bit of a kick in the teeth rather than us, but B, we are nervous to see just how much of a threat One Nation can be when the Labor brand is on the nose.
Someone just pointed out to me that there was, in fact, a Labor membership ballot for the leadership in New South Wales in 2019. So,
oh, well, there we are.
There you go.
The well-oiled
democracy manifest.
There you go. There we go.
It still works.
But sometimes, the democracy machine is so well-oiled in Labor that they don't need to have votes, perhaps.
Just happens to be that way, that it all works out. All right, time to talk to the Deputy Liberal leader, Jane Hume. First, here was her colleague, the Shadow Treasurer, calling for a federal Royal Commission into the building sector.
We need to understand that what started in Victoria has now been replicated nationwide. The model from Dan Andrews has been taken by Anthony Albanese to Canberra and exported this model of corruption, which is increasing costs for construction, which means Australians are getting less when they go and buy a home. They're paying higher prices, and that's why I've argued that we should see a Royal Commission into the CFMEU at a nationwide level.
Jane Hume, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, David.
So Angus Taylor hasn't called for a federal Royal Commission, only Tim Wilson has. Is the Coalition's position that there should be a federal Royal Commission alongside a Victorian Royal Commission?
Well, David, it is passing strange that Anthony Albanese has shown such extraordinary lack of curiosity, lack of interest into the extent of corruption on construction sites right around the country, particularly when there is federal Commonwealth taxpayer money that's been involved. The suburban rail loop is the best example of that. Even after knowing that there were at least 4 allegations of corruption on the suburban rail loop site, Anthony Albanese committed $3.8 billion of Commonwealth taxpayers' money to that project. And I think that there are questions that should be answered about that. Now, we support the Victorians having a Royal Commission into corruption in the construction industry. And Jess Wilson has been right to lead the charge on this, say that she will work closely with the new Premier down there to make sure that it actually gets to the bottom of corruption, that it isn't just a political fix, that it fixes the systemic problem that the construction industry in Victoria has faced for so long.
So is Tim Wilson then out on his own calling for a federal Royal Commission, or is it the Coalition's policy?
Well, we would like to see Anthony Albanese take a more forward-leaning stance into investigation of corruption. In fact, he could do
what
that
does that
immediately.
Mean, sorry, Senator, does that mean a federal Royal Commission?
No, it doesn't. But what it does mean is that there is an option to have a Senate inquiry into corruption in the construction industry. It's something that we've been talking about for some time. My colleague, Senator Maria Kovacic, has gathered more than 50,000 signatures on a petition calling for a Senate inquiry into corruption in the construction industry. We've been blocked every step of the way. The Greens don't want it, Labor don't want it. But if you are serious about integrity, if you are serious about stamping out corruption in construction, which is causing costs for construction to rise so far and so fast, and all Australians pay a price for that, well, why not start with a Senate inquiry? That would be a good step. But we do support Jess Wilson in her quest to have a Royal Commission in Victoria.
Okay. Jacinta Allans had been facing criticism across a range of issues, including the work from home rules that she wanted to introduce, giving workers a guaranteed right to 2 days working from home each week. Business was highly critical of this plan. The new Premier is now looking at winding back these rules. Do you think he should?
I think the new Premier should be looking at winding back an awful lot of the commitments that Jacinta Allans has made. Certainly the business community has rightly expressed concern about this policy because, let's face it, the Victorian economy is tanking. Businesses are declaring insolvency on a daily basis, or they're packing up and moving interstate. Our unemployment rate in Victoria is the highest in the country. Our youth unemployment is more than double the national rate. This should be the alarm bells for Victorian leaders to make sure that we inject new life into the economy, not keep holding it back.
One question that the Liberals aren't yet answering in Victoria is whether they would govern in coalition with One Nation. At the federal level, Angus Taylor says you won't do that. Andrew Bragg says you'll be pragmatic. Where do you stand? No, we will not be governing in coalition with One Nation. We are not forming a coalition with One Nation. I think we couldn't be any clearer than that. We have a coalition. The Liberals are already in coalition with the National Party. That coalition has been the foundation of very successful governments for 80 years now, and it will continue to be so. So what's Andrew Bragg getting at when he says you'd be pragmatic? If you're in a situation where you can't form a majority, would you look at a minority government with the support of One Nation at least?
Well, that's an extraordinary hypothetical. We've
not when
seen
the
minority
polls are where
governments
they
in the
are.
past. Well, but there isn't an election for at least 18 months, David, so of course it's a hypothetical question. Governments have formed minority governments in the past with all sorts of parties. Our intention is to win outright, and we do that by making sure that we present a credible plan and a credible team to deliver that plan. That's exactly what Angus Taylor and I have been doing for the last 23, 24 weeks that he has been the leader, and that's what we'll continue to do for the next 18 months prior to the federal election.
Okay, so just so everyone's clear, definitely no coalition, but a minority government taking support from One Nation is possible.
No, that's your words, that's not my words. I've said that we have no plans, no intention. There is no plans to have a coalition with One Nation. That is our commitment. We are already in coalition. We plan to govern as a coalition, as a Liberal national coalition, as we have done for 80 years. And at the next election, Australians will have a genuine choice between a terrible Labor government that has seen their standard of living go backwards so far and so fast, or One Nation that has no plans, that simply has slogans. A credible alternative is a Liberal national coalition led by Angus Taylor.
But possibly relying on the support of One Nation or not?
David, you keep trying to put words in my mouth that do not exist.
No, I'm just asking the question.
We are not in coalition with One Nation.
No, that's not the question. It's whether you would govern in a minority government with support from One Nation or not.
David, it's 18 months until the next election. We have a long way to go. We are concentrating on making sure that we speak to every Australian out there and demonstrate that the Coalition's plan to lower taxes, lower energy prices, lower migration, build more homes and put Australians first is the appealing policy set for them, that they can see their hopes and dreams and aspirations reflected in what it is that the Coalition, the Liberal National Coalition, can offer them at the next election.
Let's look at your portfolio. Industrial relations. Have you made any decision yet on any Labor laws that you would repeal?
Well, I'm not going to announce new policies here on television, as I'm sure you would understand, David.
Feel free.
But there are some reviews of Labor legislation that is currently sitting on the Minister's desk. So we'll wait to see what the results of those reviews are. But I think you should probably understand, and your viewers should understand, the lens through which the Coalition looks at industrial relations. We think that any industrial relations system should be fair. It should be fair for employees, certainly. It should be fair for employers, and it should be fair for consumers, because they're the three elements of any industrial relations system, and that's how the economy is driven. Most importantly, though, it should also be a simple system, because when we have a complicated system, then mistakes are made inadvertently, and that costs everybody more. When you get to a stage when even the ABC has inadvertently mispaid its staff, you know that the system is way too complicated. And thirdly, most importantly, an industrial relations system should drive productivity. Previous Labor governments have understood this. The Hawke government is a great example, because unless you have that driving of productivity, well, then your standard of living goes backwards. You can't have economic growth without inflation, and numerous Reserve Bank governors have reiterated that point. So that's what we want to see in industrial relations.
Based on those principles, do the same job, same pay laws provide the simple system and higher productivity that you're talking about?
Well, I think the entire system we know at the moment is not simple, and it isn't fair, and it isn't driving productivity. Now, I'm not going to get into individual pieces of legislation. As I said, there are reviews of those legislation sitting on the minister's desk. I'm looking forward to the Labor government's response to the reviews of its own legislation to see whether they think that it's working. But let's be honest, you don't need to go too far to see a banking up of claims that Fair Work, that small businesses are feeling that the system is stacked against them, and that the economy is not benefiting from a more flexible industrial relations system that would help drive productivity, drive growth and deliver prosperity for everybody.
Angus Taylor has denied making any payments to a right-wing Liberal Party sub-faction that's currently being examined by the New South Wales corruption watchdog ICAC. Amongst other things, this group had apparently been trying to knock Susan Lee out of the Parliament. Are you curious, Jane Hume, to know if Angus Taylor had anything to do with this group?
Well, can we be very clear here that the leader of the Liberals is not a party to any of the matters that ICAC are referring to? He hasn't been approached by the ICAC. And to be honest, I feel that this is so distant from him. I agree with Chris Minns on this one, and I don't say that very often, but I do agree with Chris Minns on this one. ICAC should be allowed to go through its processes free of political interference, free of commentary from politicians, and be allowed to run its course.
However, we still don't know, despite many questions this week about what Angus Taylor's involvement with this group was, whether he knew what they were up to. Yes, that's a matter for ICAC, but for the Liberal Party, have you asked him, or is this sort of activity in the Liberal Party not a problem?
No, of course not. I'm his deputy leader. I speak to Angus almost every day, and we speak about numerous things. I'm not going to get into what it is that we speak about. But I do want to point out... But you've asked
him about this? Can you at least say that?
No, I'm not going to get into any conversations that I've had with Angus. They're private conversations between a leader and a deputy leader. And they happen every single day on so many issues.
But is this sort of sub-factional activity, is that okay in the Liberal Party, or would you at least condemn what they've been up to?
I have to admit that I don't know all the details of this. This is a New South Wales ICAC. You're the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. This is a New South Wales ICAC investigation looking at activities that have occurred in the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party, and I'm a Victorian.
But you're the federal deputy leader, Senator. Surely you have some curiosity about this sort of activity in your party.
Yes, and do you know what? When I was with Brian Loughnane writing the review into the 2022 election, we specifically said that each division needs to make sure that its constitution is fit for purpose and that its membership is match fit to fight elections. I reiterate that point. It is so fundamentally important, but this is an issue for ICAC. It's not something that I can comment on. It's not something that the leader is involved in. He hasn't been named, he hasn't been called, he hasn't been approached. It's kind of very different distance, and I think that the ICAC should be allowed to do what it needs to do.
Absolutely, but should you as the deputy leader be willing to condemn this sort of sub-factional activity?
Well, I don't actually understand what the activity is all about. That's for ICAC, and ICAC are revealing exactly what's going on, so I don't want to comment on it. But I should say, and I'm happy to comment on, the fact that each of our state divisions should be undertaking a review of its own constitution and its own membership to make sure that we are the fighting fit electoral machine that we should be in the lead up to both state and federal elections.
A couple of other things. Fuel excise relief ends tonight. Is that the right call?
Well, we've supported the government in cutting fuel excise earlier on in the year when prices were particularly volatile. That was an important measure, we felt. And we even supported the government when it cut back on the fuel excise cuts to slowly taper that down. However, we did also expect that the government would find offsets for those costs in the budget. It failed to do so. That means that these cuts to fuel excise are going to cost Australians more and more. The real problem here, though, let's face it, is that while fuel is one of the great drivers of the cost of living crisis, there are others as well. And the government has failed to get the cost of living crisis under control by failing to get inflation under control. It's been more than 4.5 years now that the government has failed to get inflation under control. That's left our country far less resilient to shocks, and that's exactly what the Reserve Bank governor was saying just this week. If the government would get inflation under control by doing its fair share of the heavy lifting, using fiscal levers to manage inflation, not just relying on monetary policy, we would be in much better shape when these international shocks occur.
A lot there in that answer, but back to the question, is it right to end the fuel excise relief tonight?
Well, we would like to see the government deal with the primary cause of inflation and the cost of living, first and foremost, and we'd like to see the government genuinely not just deal with the short-term issue of fuel prices, but the long-term issue. That's why we've announced that we would double our reserves, our fuel reserves, that we would make sure that we introduce new storage and refinery capacity, that we look at new fuel sources like biofuels. This is how you fix the problem.
Ending the excise relief tonight, is there reluctance to say yes or no, you don't want to upset motorists?
Well, it's a decision for the government, but can I tell you that Australians are going to feel the pain. There is no doubt about it. They didn't need to feel this pain because the pain would have been lessened if we were a more resilient economy and that the government had done its fair share of the heavy lifting to get inflation down, and that would have solved the cost of living crisis. Instead, it's continued to spend, it's had its foot on the accelerator, and that means the Reserve Bank's had to put interest rates up. That's why Australians are feeling pain, and that's why this is felt even more acutely, these international shocks.
During this period, electric vehicle sales have taken off. According to the Australian Automobile Association, just over 49% of new car sales in the June quarter were electric or hybrid, so nearly half now. Does that surprise you, and do you welcome that?
No, I think that's the market speaking with its feet, and probably why we don't necessarily need more subsidies on electric vehicles. The market is doing exactly what it should. Consumers want to see more electric vehicles in the market, they'll go out there and buy them. But unfortunately, the subsidy program that's been run by this government has run out of control. It's costing Australians more and more, and that's putting more pressure on the budget.
Angus Taylor has been arguing lately that the 5% home deposit scheme is available to migrants as soon as they arrive in the country. That's not right, is it?
Well, it's available to permanent residents, not just citizens. We've said that we would like to see...
Not migrants as soon as they arrive in the country, though, is that...
Well, we've said that we would like to see programs like the NDIS, like the 5% deposit scheme, like access to our very generous welfare system, limited to Australian citizens only.
Does the leader need to be a bit more careful, though, when he's talking about new migrants?
Well, I think we can be very clear. We want to encourage skilled migration. We want to make sure that we encourage permanent residents that are here to become citizens, because if you commit to Australia, we'll commit to you, and I think that's a very reasonable position to take.
Final question. Labor MP Luke Gosling has been charged with assault. He denies the allegation, but he hasn't been stood aside from his position as a special envoy in the government for Northern Australia Defence and Veterans Affairs. What's your view on this? What should be the bar for standing a special envoy aside?
Well, absolutely, Anthony Albanese should stand aside his special envoy. This is a pretty serious charge that has been laid against Luke Gosling. He's been charged of a serious assault. Now, it's alleged at this stage, but the charge has been laid. Anthony Albanese has been very quick to condemn other people and request in previous lives that Prime Ministers stand down their ministers or their senior members of Parliament. For far less, I think that he should live up to his own high expectations and stand Luke Gosling down.
So Mark Butler this morning has argued he's not a member of the executive, he's basically a backbencher. Does that make it different?
Well, then why give him the charge of special envoy and the privileges that go with it? I think that you should be very consistent in your approach. If Anthony Albanese was consistent, if he was a man of the genuine integrity that he claims to be, well, then he would stand Luke Gosling down.
Deputy Liberal Leader Jane Hume, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
Well, coming up, 3 leaders, 3 party donation dramas, how conflicts of interest overran the political agenda. First, let's get back to our panel. The Herald Sun's James Campbell, Jacqueline Maley from the Sydney Morning Herald and the ABC's Tom Crowley. James, just to pick up on this issue around the Liberal One Nation coalition, yes, it's a question that keeps being asked, and we're hearing Angus Taylor firm up a position and Jane Hume as well, no to a coalition. What about in Victoria? Because Jess Wilson, the Liberal leader, isn't quite being as clear on that.
Well, I don't think she's going to be in government with them, but if she needs them to govern, she'll need them to govern. And the fact of the matter is, too, the upper house, which they will need a working majority in, all the polling shows they're only going to achieve that majority with One Nation. So they're going to need a decent relationship with One Nation if they're going to get anything done. So it's not in her interests to, be ruling things out in that department. But to be fair, in the lower house, I think the Liberal Party and the coalition are travelling well enough that in most situations, One Nation preferences are going to be electing Liberal MPs. One Nation aren't really going that hard in Victoria either. They don't have a leader. They still don't have a leader. They haven't got any candidates.
So apparently that might come this week.
If you talk to One Nation, they've got 3 elections coming up: Victoria, New South Wales, and the federal election, and they are very much in descending order of importance. Victoria, they know it's not really a comfort zone for them. They're playing; it's an away game. They just don't want to do badly. They've got 1 MP. If they get 2 MPs or 3 MPs, they've improved their lot. New South Wales, they are far more interested.
I think the polling numbers, there's a couple of ways that it could go. And I mean, the reason I think it's such a difficult question for Liberals is I think there is a scenario that, so the Redbridge MRP, which had sort of roughly even primary votes, I think Redbridge split up seat by seat with something pretty comfortable for Jess Wilson, where she has the lion's share of the seats. She would have clear authority, and One Nation would become kind of like the Nats in a cabinet, essentially, and maybe it's a little bit chaotic, but probably no more chaotic than our own backbench. But Ben Rowie, the polling analyst, was suggesting that the preference flows to One Nation in that Redbridge MRP. You could reasonably view them a different way that would essentially get 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I think it's unlikely.
I think that's wrong.
I think the upside of the numbers, at least, I mean, I guess even just having a primary vote in the high 20s, it's not inconceivable that you could have enough seats to make it much more uncomfortable.
From talking to pollsters, the level of voter discipline of that One Nation vote is approaching green. It's Greens Labor. It's hitting 90% and so there's just not going to be the kind of drift. Plus, the other thing to remember is, in certain cases, there will be coalition, One Nation, 1-2. Labor will get knocked out. Labor's vote will go overwhelmingly to the coalition. So they've got 2 routes to victory. Yeah. I just think that this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 scenario is
anyway. Those questions are going to
Labor want to talk that up.
Labor are going to keep that pressure on about the coalition between Liberals and One Nation at the state level, at the federal level. That's very clear. Look, I want to talk about the fuel excise coming off tonight. And Jane Hume a little reluctant there, Jacqueline, to say whether that's a good thing, bad thing, but listing all the other sins of the government when it comes to inflation. It doesn't feel like the government is under a huge amount of pressure to keep that excise relief there.
No, I think that probably voters, as much as we enjoyed the relief, or drivers, as much as we enjoyed the relief, we sort of realised that it couldn't happen or couldn't hang around forever. They extended it at sort of a half rate for a month, which again was welcome relief. That doesn't mean, however, that it isn't going to make people really, really grumpy when they go to the petrol bowser next week and see how big their petrol bill suddenly is. And that anger or resentment is only going to flow in one direction. It's going to flow towards Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers. And I mean, all of the pressures in the economy are exactly the same, and this is just a kind of indicator of them, right? You know, inflation is too high, public spending is apparently contributing way too much to it, and it's very difficult to get down.
And clearly that fuel price has driven this electric vehicle rush. I mentioned the figures, here they are from the Australian Automobiles Association. They're coming out tonight, they've given them to us to have a look at this morning. So we're basically at 50% now, new car sales. I remember Bill Shorten many years ago as Labor leader said he'd like a target of 50% new car sales being electric by 2030, and here we are in mid-2026. So that's electrics and hybrids, but it's quite a remarkable jump, isn't it, Tom?
It is, and a part of why the discount that Jane Hume mentioned has cost extraordinarily more to the federal budget than was expected. But yeah, I mean, I agree on the fuel excise. I think as well the government's got to be conscious of the fiscal cost and the inflation consequence. The idea that this week's inflation read, which was a little bit soft, is a bullet dodged. I don't think anyone within government is quite ready to think about it that way. They've been burnt on that sort of thinking before. You know, the longer this war goes on, they really do have to think about the fact that they're adding to demand.
It is an odd position for the coalition to have taken, though, because there are only really two categories of people in this country at the moment. There are those who have bought electric vehicles and those who are thinking about buying an electric vehicle. And the coalition's policy at the moment is to make them more expensive. I mean,
or limit the range if you don't have.
I don't get it.
You think they should shift on that?
Well, they're not going to. But I've never understood who they thought that was going to appeal to. Budget purists, but.
You could probably mount a strong argument that it's ideological because.
Oh, I agree. Of course it is. You're right.
Coalition,
but it's billions of dollars as well. I mean, I know it's budget
billions here and billions there.
It is key to what they're trying to offer, isn't it?
But has the sentiment shifted now? I mean, look at those numbers.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's the biggest and greatest sort of price signal that you could possibly want if you're a climate activist or if you're anyone who cares about emissions in the economy. I mean, it reinforces, I think, you know, Australians reportedly are very good early adopters of new technology. This is new technology. It's now being, you know, it's becoming mainstream. It's becoming less scary, and it reinforces how sort of old technology fossil fuels are. They cost a lot of money to dig up. They cost a lot of money to process. They cost a lot of money to bring over to Australia.
And then we're at risk if there's a war that stops that supply.
We live in such uncertain sort of global environment that it's become a security issue, and I think people realise that.
All right, well, the integrity issues have been facing all sides of politics this week, as mentioned, and uncomfortable questions over who's donated to who and why.
One Nation leader Pauline Hanson has confirmed Australia's richest person paid for her flights during a recent European trip.
Look straight at my eyes. It didn't cost the taxpayer 1 cent.
Critics are asking, what does Gina Reinhardt get in return?
A dirt file, a leaked video and factional warfare.
The latest bombshell evidence delivered at the ICAC.
The federal opposition leader repeatedly denied having ever made a payment to support the reformers.
No payment. I'm not going to give a running commentary on it. I've answered these questions yesterday. I'm not going to give a running comment. As I say, I have answered these questions. As I say, I'm not going to give a running commentary. As I say, no payment was made. I'm not going to give a running commentary on this.
Anthony Albanese has been caught on the back foot when he was grilled over a fundraising dinner
at the home of the son of a Chinese high roller who was accused by the tax office of deceiving authorities.
Oh, look, I attend lots of functions.
What about this one?
I attend lots of functions in lots of places, including last night right here.
What about this dinner in Point Piper?
I attend lots of functions in lots of places.
Why do you want to answer that?
Well, I do. You've just said that that occurred.
All right, well, let's start with Angus Taylor. Jane Hume is right to say he has not been called to give evidence at ICAC. He is not a direct focus of their inquiry. However, Tom, should he be nervous at all about what's unfolding there?
I think it's one of these classic things where the question is, will there... The smoking gun would be if there is any kind of message or testimony that suggests that he had some whiff of what this reformers group was doing and perhaps didn't show the requisite level of curiosity.
Just to let people know, what were they?
It's sort of a kind of an escalating series of, I guess, general party skullduggery and branch stacking, but then all the way down to the most serious, which is that the money for those activities was getting around the New South Wales election disclosure
not
laws,
properly declared.
And then also coming from banned donors and going through sham contracts and using the resources of the New South Wales Catholic school system. So there's all of that part of thing. I mean, it does come into the federal party a little bit, reporting this morning in the Sydney Morning Herald about Susan Lee's pre-selection and attempts from this group to oust her. I think it just comes down to that question of, that these are people in Angus Taylor's broad political orbit and from his side of the party, clearly enough that Dallas McInerney felt comfortable bragging in a group chat, it seems, about being able to shake down Angus Taylor, even if that didn't lead to any actual money, as Angus Taylor said.
No payment was made.
No, that's not what he said. What he said was, I didn't make any payment. He didn't.
He did say no payment.
I never heard him use the first person.
No, he said, no, I think the question is not going to be whether he paid it, but whether he caused it to be paid.
I'm pretty sure he said no payment was made.
Someone will no payment was made. I took to be
me. So what do you infer from that?
Well, he's gone to he's gone to see Taylor when he's. One would imagine in a situation like that, when someone goes, if Dallas McInerney goes to see him, he says, "I want this money." Taylor basically would have said, you wouldn't have expected him to say, "I'm writing this cheque myself," or it's even coming out of my electorate funds. What he really means is, "Can you find the money for me?" And Taylor, if Taylor has been a bit tricky about that, then there could be a problem for him.
Well, he did say no payment was made. So
there is something else to say about this. What the hell has that got to do with corruption, right? What is ICAC doing, sniffing around in?
Well, they're allegedly illegal donations. They're above the cap, and they're being. But money the entire point of the investigation.
But Angus Taylor funding some kind of factional operation is nothing to do with the New South Wales government. It's nothing to do with New South Wales laws. The issues that they're looking at is, one, were the donation laws of New South Wales breached? That's fair enough. That's legitimate, right? Who was stacking who and what and how in Farah is really none of their business.
None of whose business?
It's none of ICAC's business. I think the more interesting and more dangerous thing is the New South Wales Catholic schools system. Because if taxpayer money that has gone to fund schools is being used to pay for no-show jobs for staff at
who are actually working,
that is a big problem.
Yeah, Jacqueline?
We haven't yet seen whether they're going to. I think there might be some pushback on that though from them.
I mean, James says it's none of ICAC's business. What they're actually looking at is, of course, the potentially illegal donations and the fact that these donations were made for political activity and they weren't declared, or they weren't declared above the cap. It is our business, though, isn't it? How these operations work. I mean, the stated aim of these guys, these young guys, were to flood the entire New South Wales Liberal Party with 5,000 Christian Conservatives and to take over the entire state branch of the Liberal Party.
That's not a crime.
No, nobody's saying it's a crime, but I'm saying it's in the public interest. And it's important.
No, it's interesting to the public. It's not in the public interest.
No, I would completely disagree with that. This is how internal politics work. This is one of the reasons why the Liberal Party has made itself, unelectable in New South Wales, and indeed, you could say, at a federal level. I think it's absolutely in the public interest, and particularly when someone who is aspiring to be the Prime Minister, whether or not he's made donations or made payments through a circuitous route, and there's no evidence that he has, but he's going to, Dallas McInerney, who's the former head of New South Wales Catholic Schools, is going to be asked about that because he's the one texting people saying, "I'm shaking down Angus for 10 grand." Well, he's going to be in the stand soon, and he's going to be asked, where did you get that money from Angus? And why did you say, or why did this other guy say that you had if you hadn't? Apart from that, he's aspiring to be the Prime Minister, and these are his factional allies. This is who he's lying down with.
Yeah, and I think it just adds nationally to this kind of whiff that's playing into Pauline Hanson and One Nation's hands. And the same's true for Albanese and the Felix Lee dinner. Quite apart from the actual propriety of it, it's actually the very fact that it's pretty plain communal garden and that this happens that I think people hear that. I think it's the same with this kind of factional manoeuvring, but with Albanese saying, I go to all sorts of dinners, I think people hear, sorry, what do you mean? You go to millionaires' houses for all sorts of dinners all the time to raise money?
Yes.
Yes, they do. No, it's not a shock to me. No, I'm saying that people... James, I'm saying that people who are likely to support Pauline Hanson, that Labor's trying to link her with Gina Rinehart, and I think what she says is, well, Gina Reinhart's out in the open. She's given me a plane. She's taken me to Sicily. The relationship is not a secret. But they all do this as well. They're all the same. And for
Just
people who
that,
are wanting to throw the system out, it just adds to the whiff. That's all I'm saying.
Just quickly on that. A lot of premiers publicise their diaries or a summary of their diaries so we can see who they're meeting and so on. Should the Prime Minister's diary
absolutely
be made
100%? I think Anthony Albanese came to government largely on a platform of integrity and transparency. That would be a really, really easy transparency measure. And the point has been made. I mean, this dinner that you're talking about, the Point Piper dinner, with the son of the billionaire and various sort of banking bosses and ex-banking bosses, that kind of access was, essentially bought because it looks like it was a donation dinner for the Labor Party. We would only find out about that, if it wasn't for the reporting of journalists in my stable, we would only find out about that 6 months down the track on a donations register, and it would be completely out of context. We wouldn't know who had done it or why they had done it, and now we have some context, but only because of the reporting of diligent journalists.
Luke Gosling, let's talk about the federal Labor MP for Solomon, which covers Darwin and Palmerston up in the Territory. There's this alleged incident, alleged assault. He's now on charges. He's denying any wrongdoing here. The question has quickly become, what should the Prime Minister do? James, should he stand aside this special envoy?
Well, if he wants the questions to go away, then yes, he should. I mean, we'll see where this goes.
Why isn't he?
Good question. That's a very good question. Stubbornness.
The Labor line is...
what happens in the Territory stays in the Territory, who knows?
Well, the suggestion is it doesn't really matter. He's not a member of the executive. He's basically a backbencher.
If it doesn't matter, stand him aside then. And standing aside is not an admission of culpability. Standing aside is what you do when proceedings play their way out. So, I don't really see... Mark Butler this morning was having a little bit of trouble saying... essentially, yes, he doesn't matter, and that's why we're not standing him aside. I'm not sure that.
There's been a bit of reporting about the character and the background of the administrator as well, who, a lot of people wouldn't have known that he's sort of like a governor, so he's supposed to be statesmanlike and I suppose above the political fray. And certainly one of the reports that I read this week about his previous social media posts described them as racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic and bigoted, which is, he's covering all bases there.
So there's some background there.
There's some background, and it almost, I don't know if that's playing into the government's decision here that they feel like he's not exactly a clean skin or he's not a sort of, what do you call it, a sort of
may well be their thinking.
Innocent victim.
Once you're charged by police with
100%.
a criminal charge of assault, you think
I'm
something
really,
needs to happen.
I mean, I feel like there should be just some sort of protocol. Like the parties should just have a blanket rule about this stuff because it does come up from time to time. We saw it obviously with Craig Thompson. The Labor Party got themselves into a terrible mess with that.
Well, he was suspended from the caucus altogether. Even though
he was, but they continued to take his vote, and that became, as you know, a huge political issue. They just didn't sort of know what to do about it because I don't think he was charged when he was still sitting in Parliament, but there were all these allegations hanging over him. So I feel like they need to have a protocol. So and again, to be serious about it. It is a trust issue with the public.
Yep, maybe once you're charged, something needs to happen. Anyway, staying in the Northern Territory, the annual Garma Festival is underway this weekend in East Arnhem Land. It's a celebration of Yolngu culture and a peak gathering of Indigenous leaders and policymakers. But the Prime Minister isn't there this year. Our Indigenous Affairs correspondent Dana Morse, however, is there. Dana, great to see you. Look, Anthony Albanese's been a regular attendee at Garma, of course, over the years, but not this time. How has that gone down?
Good morning, David. Well, people have been expressing both private and public disappointment that Anthony Albanese broke the promise that he made on the Garma main stage last year, which was to keep coming back to the Garma Festival as long as he was Prime Minister. It's something that's been expressed to me by Larissa Baldwin-Roberts it's not so much that we need Anthony Albanese here to be having the strategic discussions about the challenges and opportunities for Indigenous Australians. It's more that his absence sends a signal of where Indigenous affairs sits as a priority for the federal government. And without the buy-in of the federal government, there's limited progress or reforms that can be made. Also on the agenda here has been the fact that Anthony Albanese came to power with a much broader reform agenda in the Indigenous affairs space, much broader than The Voice. But ever since the loss of the referendum, he's basically crab-walked away from those commitments.
Well, we know the Minister, Malindiri McCarthy, is there and has been there, the Shadow Minister, Julian Leeser as well. From what you've heard, Dana, from both of them, the Minister and the Shadow Minister, are you hearing any new directions in particular on Indigenous policy, particularly after those, once more disappointing figures during the week on the Close the Gap targets?
Well, Garma comes on the heels of a Closing the Gap data update every year, and those figures are really not surprising for people who work in this space. And what the real question is around that is, how does Closing the Gap need to be made more effective? Julian Leeser went to that on Friday as part of his speech, and he sort of suggested a bit of a pivot, focusing more on the 4 priority reforms for Closing the Gap and letting the 17 other socioeconomic targets be something that is observed but not necessarily a driver of policy. That's one school of thought. Another school of thought came from a conversation I had with National Indigenous Children's Commissioner Sue-Ann Hunter, who said really the issue around Closing the Gap is accountability. And as she put it to me pretty bluntly yesterday, whose heads will roll if those targets are not met come 2031? Now, what I can tell you about Closing the Gap is that the Productivity Commission is obligated to do a review every 3 years. And I understand that the terms of reference for that review are currently sitting with the government and are expected to be signed off imminently.
Interesting. Dana, finally, Garma, it's such an important festival and celebration of that culture. What is it like up there this year?
David, look, you're being sorely missed up here this year, I will say. People always come and ask us, where's David Speers? Where's David Speers? But it's beautiful. As every year, the Yolngu people welcome us onto Gulkula with so much grace. The theme for this year is Bookmak, or everyone, and that's exactly who is invited to Garma each year. But as beautiful as this place is, it's clear that the lives of Indigenous Australians are hard, particularly in remote communities like this one. And what the leaders of the Garma Festival will tell you is what's more important than this coming to this festival itself is what the CEOs, the politicians and the captains of industry that come and sit with them here do once they leave Gulkula.
Yeah, it's a very special place. Hopefully back there again soon. Dana, great that you're there and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Tom, we should point out why the Prime Minister's not there this weekend.
He's taking a break, so yes. It might be up to the acting Prime Minister, Richard Marles, who we know, always loves to point out that he's acting Prime Minister. He might have to move aside a special envoy or two over the course of the week.
Well, that's an interesting point. Look, in fairness, the Prime Minister doesn't take a lot of days off, so he said, look, I need to have a bit of a break here. But I don't know, could Richard Marles as acting Prime Minister make a call on something like shifting...
A vice-captain's call.
A vice-captain's call on standing aside...
Never been a better time to flex your power if you're Richard Marles.
Exactly, we will see. All right, our panel, Tom Crowley, Jacqueline Maley and James Campbell back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Zoe Norton-Lodge and Talking Pictures.
Hello, I'm Zoe Norton-Lodge, Executive Producer for Arts and Entertainment, and I reckon Australia's maybe 4th best Mike Bowers impersonator. I'm talking pictures this morning with Planet America's Melina Wicks. Good morning, Melina.
Good morning, Zoe.
Politics is in a state of flux this week, especially if that state is Victoria.
A Labor leader knifed on the eve of an election. It's making me nostalgic for the 2010s.
Totally. Mark Knight's cartoon. We've got Jacinta Allans. She's throwing the keys to Ben Carroll to the ALP car. My work is done. It's all yours, Ben.
It pulls to the left a bit. And there is a warning for potholes, but that looks more like a sinkhole.
His driving instructor is the Grim Reaper.
Yes, this is why Melburnians do prefer the tram.
David Rowe has him naked, why not, on a wrecking ball, Miley Cyrus style.
This is quite the introduction to anyone who's just learnt Ben Carroll exists.
I do wonder if this hard hat Jacinta's wearing is going to protect her from the Royal Commission or whatever Ben Carroll is doing above her head right there. Cut Hudson here. He's got Jess Wilson, the Lib leader, not exactly looking formidable, is she? And then we've got Alan and Carol, and they don't realise they've hacked off their own sail.
And the One Nation boat is looking rather seaworthy.
Look at her eyebrows, you can see them a mile away.
Not pictured here, the Greens, who I assume are somewhere off to the side in a banana boat.
Sally McManus and Michelle O'Neill both resigned. Pope has them going past a few headlines about themselves. Shock, voluntary leadership spill.
Women public figures finish up thankless job.
Leave on their own terms.
To allow generational renewal.
But if you were to consider going into politics, this probably is not the ideal preparation. That is a really good point, isn't it?
And this is the kind of spring in your step you certainly don't get from a career in politics.
Well, Melina, it was time to be alert but not alarmed this week. as we tested Oz Alert, our new emergency warning system. Harry Bruce here, the housing crisis, plague, Trump, Iran war, Pauline burning up there, the cost of living. No need to panic, it's just a test.
Maybe just send us an alert when there's not anything to worry about.
No need to panic, everything's fine.
I still feel a little bit panicked.
Matt Golding here. We've got Oz Alert, beep, 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 and then Euro Alert, which is just fires.
Good luck getting anybody to look up from their phone.
They should just set everyone's phones on fire.
Yes, now I'm paying attention.
Now we've got Megan Herbert. She's got this lovely chap who's headed to the travel agency, Continental Adventure World Travel. He's looking around at the options. We've got Europe, it's on fire. America, there's Trump, Asia, Antarctica, everything's melting. Africa, more fires, there's flooding. I'd like to book a... Never mind. I mean, she is right. International travel does feel a little bit grim, doesn't it?
Who needs to go all the way to Europe when we're famous for bushfires right here at home?
We are. That's true. We get the Commonwealth Games. Peter Brolman is taking us to the Climate Change Games. We've got Spain, Canada and France all streaking ahead on the podium. Australia's just warming up. We'll join the medal tally soon.
Yeah, the Climate Change Games where everybody loses.
Yeah. Kathy Wilcox, quick, we need more water to cool down the data centres that are overheating from processing all the news about unprecedented wildfires. Quite depressing, isn't it?
Surely there's something we can do. I'll ask Claude.
Oh, ask Claude. Oh, I know what Claude says. Claude's saying, Melina, I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Melina. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Claude. All right, let's get some final observations. Tom.
Well, I think we're going to be having a fight on tobacco excise pretty soon. One Nation's made its intentions broadly clear, but I think Angus Taylor will go there in a few weeks too. Labor's been pretty clear it'll take a dim view of it federally, at least, Mark Butler. But I just wonder for Ben Carroll whether picking a fight with the federal government, given the prominence of the tobacco wars on the streets of Melbourne, maybe this could be a chance for him to distinguish himself by siding with Angus over Albo.
So you're tipping Angus will call for a reduction in the tobacco excise?
Not totally scrapping it, I think, but a reduction.
It's going to be an interesting debate. Jacqueline.
Hannah Ferguson, who's a young digital sort of media mogul, taking on Anthony Albanese in his home seat of Grayndler is a very interesting development. We reported on this week. She's young. She's got this entire sort of built-in digital audience and in very highly engaged kind of listenership and readership. It's sort of the face of left-wing populism, perhaps biting Anthony Albanese where it's most going to hurt. She probably won't knock him off in his fiefdom of Grayndler, but it will be an interesting one to watch.
And it might be a little more difficult than it's been taken on the Greens for Anthony Albanese. There's different dynamics around it, but her chances are a bit of a long shot.
He's sitting on a 17% margin. I mean, he's pretty much got Grayndler locked down, and it's never been not a Labor seat for its entire existence. But she is maybe the face of new politics, and she's definitely represents a disruptive force. It's something interesting to watch.
It will be. James.
Also a disruptive force. One of the things that the conversations going on in the Liberal Party at the moment is, what does Tony Abbott want? He's the president, he's been a noisy president, and increasingly people are starting to talk about, does he want to come back?
What do you think?
I don't think he ever wanted to go away, so I wouldn't be...
Original disruptor.
The question is where?
Yeah, well, presumably New South Wales for starters, but not necessarily running in his old seat.
No, I don't think that's...
I think there have been some, Central
Shortland's
Coast
been
seats,
talked about.
The Hunter Valley seats. Yeah, watch this space. What would his chances be, though, do you think?
For what?
For coming back?
Oh, I think if they found him in the right spot, he could come back. I mean, he's acting like a bloke who wants to come back.
Whether Angus Taylor would welcome him.
I don't understand what Angus Taylor's doing about this. He seems to be cool with what's happening, and he's stealing his thunder all the time.
One to come back to. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Thanks for your company too. Finally, when preparing a speech with artificial intelligence, it's a good idea to delete the AI notes from the end product, as one Canadian politician discovered. See if you can spot where things went wrong. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Citizens often develop expectations that exceed the powers actually granted to those offices. Here's a more natural flowing version of that section that reads like a legislative speech rather than a series of short points.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.